Will you be gentle? That's what she asked, insecure on that first night. What he did went beyond any promise. It was pure love. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss how innocence met tenderness. The door to the presidential suite closed with a soft click, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emma's hands trembled as she held the edge of the white silk robe, a wedding gift that still smelled of jasmine perfume. From across the enormous room, decorated with reclaimed wood panels and burgundy velvet curtains, James stood by the panoramic window, watching the lights of Manhattan flicker like fallen stars against the asphalt night. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. At only 22 years old, raised in Brooklyn where houses pressed against each other, and the sound of neighbors penetrated thin walls like tissue paper, she had never imagined she'd be here, married to one of the most powerful men in America. Her reflection in the gold-framed mirror returned the image of a woman who seemed to have stepped out of a fairy tale: pale skin, dark brown eyes full of uncertainty, and a wedding dress that had cost more than everything her family had earned in 5 years. The question left her lips in a whisper that carried the full weight of her vulnerability, her fears, everything she had heard from other women in late-night conversations while they sewed together. Will you be gentle with me? He turned slowly, and what she saw in those eyes was not the rush she so feared, nor the impatience of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. She saw tears. A 40-year-old man accustomed to commanding empires and making decisions that moved millions of dollars had glistening eyes. The light from the bohemian crystal chandelier captured each drop, threatening to overflow, transforming him into something human, vulnerable, real. James crossed the room with measured steps, his Italian shoes silent on the Persian rug that had belonged to his great-grandfather. Instead of touching her, he knelt before her. The position was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Emma had imagined, that she felt the air leave her lungs. "I'm going to be more than gentle," he said with a broken voice, each word weighing like a promise carved in stone. "I'll wait as long as you need. Today, tomorrow, months if necessary. I want you to choose me every day, not just once at the altar. I want you, when you look at me, to not see the businessman, or the last name, or the money. I want you to see the man I am, and decide if that man deserves your trust." Emma felt something break inside her, but it wasn't pain. It was the sound of walls falling, of rusted armor crumbling. She extended a trembling hand and touched his cheek, where a tear had traced a shining path. "Why are you crying?" she asked in a barely audible voice. "Because I'm afraid," he confessed, holding her hand against his face as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Afraid of not being enough for you. Afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you made a mistake. Afraid that tonight is just a beautiful beginning of something I won't know how to maintain." What Emma didn't know in that moment was that this night would unleash a 2-year journey that would test every fiber of what they had promised before God, family, and New York society. Born into a family where affection was a rare luxury like Alaskan king crab, she had learned from a young age not to expect too much from people. Her mother, Sarah, a seamstress, who worked until late under the yellowish light of a flickering lamp creating evening gowns to earn bread, always said that big dreams were for those who could afford them. Emma had grown up helping with the sewing, her skilled fingers learning to create beauty even when there was nothing, developing a silent determination that few perceived beneath her fragile appearance. But there was also a genuine kindness in her, a capacity to see the good in people, even when the world insisted on showing otherwise. She was the type of woman who fed stray cats with leftovers from her own meager meal, who stopped in the middle of the street to help elderly people with their shopping bags, who smiled at strangers because she knew that sometimes a smile was the only free and beautiful thing someone received all day. That night, James kept his promise. They stayed awake until dawn, sitting on the balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue, wrapped in cashmere blankets, talking. He told her about his lonely childhood in Swiss boarding schools, about how he had learned to make money, but not to connect with people. She shared stories from the Brooklyn flea market, where her mother sold her sewing on Sundays, how she had learned to haggle with merchants and distinguish fake bills from real ones just by touch. When the sun began to paint the sky pink and orange over the Manhattan skyscrapers, Emma fell asleep with her head resting on his shoulder, and James stayed awake, looking at her, memorizing every detail of her peaceful face. silently promising himself that he would protect that peace with everything he had. True love doesn't begin with a promise, but with the decision to keep it every day, especially when it's difficult. The next morning arrived with the aroma of Colombian coffee and New York bagels that the staff had prepared following James's precise instructions. Emma woke alone in the king-size bed, and for a moment her heart sank, fearing that everything had been a mistake, that last night's kindness was just a temporary performance. The Egyptian cotton sheets felt strange against her skin, accustomed to simple fabric. The room was so large that her family apartment could fit inside it twice, but then she found a note on the nightstand, handwritten in elegant calligraphy on embossed letterhead. "Went to handle company business. You'll find your favorite breakfast on the terrace. I chose each item thinking of you. I'll be back at noon for our first lunch as husband and wife for real. P.S. The songbirds singing outside remind me that you told me you loved their song when you were a child. I had a specific tree planted where they nest just because of that." Emma got up and put on the robe, her bare feet sinking into carpet so soft it felt like walking on clouds. She opened the curtains, and the Manhattan light hit her like a blessing. From that height, the city stretched out like a living tapestry of buildings, colorful neighborhoods on the periphery, parks that looked like green patches of hope among the concrete. The terrace was a garden suspended in the sky. Climbing roses grew up wrought iron trellises, red geraniums exploded in terracotta pots, and on a reclaimed wood table was a breakfast that looked like it came from a magazine. But they weren't French croissants or Russian caviar. There was a New York-style egg breakfast with bacon, fresh bagels with cream cheese and lox, blueberry pancakes with maple syrup, fresh squeezed orange juice, and freshly brewed coffee. Food from her childhood, but elevated to its best version. Emma sat down and for the first time in months cried, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, the kind that spring when you realize someone really sees you, not as they want you to be, but as you are. A soft voice interrupted her. "Mrs. Montgomery." Emma turned to find an older woman about 60 years old, with an impeccable white apron and warm expression. "I'm Helen, the housekeeper. Mr. James asked me to introduce myself and tell you I'm at your disposal for anything you need. Please just call me Emma," she said, quickly drying her tears. "I'm not used to so much. All of this." Helen smiled with a warmth that reminded her of her grandmother. "I know, dear. And that's exactly what this house needed, someone who isn't used to it." She approached and lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "I've worked for the Montgomery family for 30 years. I've seen many things, many people passing through these rooms. But I never saw Mr. James cry with happiness until yesterday, when he saw you walking toward him at the altar. The first days were a succession of discoveries. The mansion on the Upper East Side had 23 rooms, an interior garden with an 18th century fountain, a library with first editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and a gym more equipped than any sports club. There was a staff of 8 permanent employees: Helen, 2 cooks, 3 housekeepers, a gardener, and Charles, the driver who had served the family since James was a child. James insisted that Emma get to know every corner, not as a guest, but as an owner. He introduced her to the 23 employees who worked between the house and the offices, explaining that she had full authority to make changes, to implement new ideas, to be whatever she needed to be. But the most significant gesture came when he gave her the antique keys to the private library, a space his father had never shared with anyone. "These books have been the company of generations of Montgomerys," James said, as they walked through the mahogany shelves. "But they were always kept as locked treasures, as if knowledge lost value when shared. I want this place to be different. I want you to invite whoever you want, to share this with the world if you wish." Emma spent hours there, reading not just novels, but also business books, economics, art history. She discovered she had a hunger for knowledge, a thirst that had never been quenched because she had always been too busy surviving. James would find her in the afternoons, curled up on the green leather Chesterfield sofa, surrounded by open books, and would simply sit beside her to work on his laptop, sharing the space in a comfortable silence that spoke more than 1,000 words. But the outside world wasn't as welcoming. The first time Emma accompanied James to a company event, a charity dinner at the plaza, she felt the weight of the stares. The women of New York high society, in their haute couture dresses and jewelry worth more than entire houses, studied her with a mixture of curiosity and barely disguised disdain. She heard the whispers, though they tried to be discreet. "That's the new wife. What an interesting choice. I heard she's from Brooklyn, can you imagine? Give it 6 months." These marriages never last. Emma kept her head high, her navy blue dress, chosen by James with help from a personal stylist, moving gracefully as she walked. But inside, each comment was like a splinter driving under her skin. She felt like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes, an imposter in a world that would never truly accept her. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The first 3 months were a hurricane of adaptations that left Emma exhausted every night. She learned to navigate dinners with 7 different forks, to distinguish between types of wine with which she could write a doctoral thesis, to smile politely when someone made comments that bordered on offensive disguised as compliments. "You speak so well for someone of your background," a congressman's wife once said, and Emma had to clench her fists under the table to keep from responding what she really thought. But there were moments of pure light. James never pressured her, never rushed her. He respected her space, her rhythms, her needs. In the evenings, they dined together in the private dining room when there were no social events, and he asked about her day, what she had read, her ideas. He listened with an attention she had never experienced, as if every word that came from her mouth was important, worthy of consideration. One afternoon, while walking through Central Park, feeding the ducks in the pond, while young couples rowed in boats and elderly people played chess under the century-old trees, James asked her a question that baffled her. "What do you really want to do with your life?" Emma stopped, a piece of bread halfway to the water. No one had ever asked her that. Her entire life had been about surviving, about helping her mother, about making it to the end of the month. Wanting seemed like a luxury of another life, another person. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I never had the privilege of thinking about it." "Now you do," he said softly, taking her hand, "and I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll support you. If you want to study, go back to working with sewing, start a business, travel the world, or simply discover who you are without the pressures of survival, I'm here." That conversation planted a seed. Emma began spending time at the company offices, initially just observing. She sat in board meetings as a silent observer, taking mental notes. Her eye, trained by years watching her mother negotiate with difficult customers at the market, caught details that executives with MBAs from American business schools ignored. She noticed power dynamics, bruised egos, brilliant ideas discarded because they came from the wrong person in the corporate hierarchy. In a decisive meeting about expansion to the south, where the company planned to open a chain of boutique hotels, Emma listened for 2 hours while men in suits discussed generic marketing strategies that could apply to anywhere in the world. They talked about target audience and market penetration, as if the South were just a set of numbers on a spreadsheet. Finally, she couldn't contain herself. "May I make a suggestion?" Her voice came out louder than she intended in the wood-paneled conference room. All heads turned toward her. James nodded with encouragement in his eyes, but others looked with barely veiled condescension. "You're thinking about the South as if it were territory to conquer," she began, feeling her heart beat rapidly but keeping her voice steady. "But the South is feeling, its art, its living history. If you go with the same impersonal corporate strategy you use in other places, you'll fail. You need to understand Southern hospitality, blues and country music rhythms, the farm-to-table movement. You need to hire locals who understand the soul of the place, not just hotel managers who could be anywhere in the world." The silence that followed was dense. One of the executives, a man about 50 years old with an imported tie, smiled condescendingly. "That's a quaint perspective, Mrs. Montgomery, but business requires a certain sophistication." Before Emma could respond, James intervened, his voice sharp as steel. "Emma's proposal will be studied and implemented. She's right. We've been so obsessed with numbers that we forgot we sell experiences, not hotel rooms. I want a dedicated team to develop her vision. I appreciate the other proposals, but this is the direction we'll take." That night, at home, Emma broke down. "I was an idiot," she said through tears while James held her on the bedroom couch. "Those people have decades of experience, and I only have—" "What?" Market stories. You have what they lost long ago, he replied, tenderly drying her tears. You have humanity. You have the ability to see people behind the statistics, and that, my love, is the most valuable resource in any business. The proposal was implemented 6 weeks later. The boutique hotels in Charleston, Savannah, and New Orleans were designed in collaboration with local artisans, decorated with Southern crafts, offering authentic blues and jazz experiences, and tours through farm cooperatives where guests could learn about real local production. The hired managers were passionate Southerners, showing their land, not interchangeable corporates. The result exceeded the most optimistic expectations. The hotels generated not just unexpected profits, but also positive media coverage. International travel magazines praised them as authentic gems that capture the true Southern spirit. Emma was mentioned by name in several articles as the creative mind behind Montgomery Enterprises' new direction. For the first time in her life, Emma felt she had contributed something significant that was completely her own. But success also attracted unwanted attention that would threaten to destroy the fragile confidence she had built. Success is not the enemy of love, but it can be of humility if not handled carefully. It was at a charity auction at the Met, among works by Pollock and Rothko dramatically lit, that the past made its triumphant entrance. Emma was standing beside James, discussing with an art collector about the importance of making art accessible to working classes, when she heard a voice that made her husband visibly tense. "James, darling, long time no see." Emma turned to see a woman who seemed to have stepped from the pages of Vogue. Tall, willowy thin, with platinum blonde hair styled in an elegant French twist, dressed in Chanel that probably cost more than a car. Her ice-blue eyes scanned Emma from head to toe in a fraction of a second, evaluating and dismissing in a single movement. "Victoria," James said in a carefully neutral tone, "let me introduce my wife, Emma." "Ah, yes, I've read about you in the papers," Victoria said, extending an impeccably manicured hand. Her grip was firm but cold, like touching marble. How refreshing that James chose something so different this time. The venom was wrapped in velvet, but Emma felt it. Something different. Not someone, but something. As if she were a curious acquisition instead of a person. "Victoria and I were engaged 3 years ago," James explained, though Emma already knew. She had found photos in society magazines during her sleepless night investigations on Google. "We ended things by mutual agreement." "Mutual agreement?" Victoria laughed, a crystalline sound that made several heads turn. "How chivalrous of you to reframe our history, darling. But let's leave the past where it is. I'm eager to get to know your charming wife better." In the following months, Victoria appeared everywhere, at gallery openings in Chelsea, at charity dinners in five-star hotels, at opera performances at Lincoln Center. Always impeccable, always with the perfect comment that cut without seeming to cut. "It must be interesting for you, dear, learning everything from scratch," she said once while both waited in the restroom of a Michelin-starred restaurant. "When I was by James's side, I already knew all society's codes. My family dined with senators. My great-grandfather was a governor. These things are in the blood, you know. They can't be learned just with goodwill." Emma looked at herself in the mirror, applying lipstick with hands that no longer trembled. She had learned not to let them see her bleed. "You're right," she responded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They're not in the blood. That's why they're completely irrelevant to what really matters." But Victoria's words stayed, like splinters under the skin. At night, Emma lay awake watching James sleep, wondering if he missed someone who understood his world without having to learn. Someone who could talk about aristocratic lineages and summers in the Hamptons and skiing in the Swiss Alps. Someone who didn't need to be told which fork to use. Doubt doesn't need evidence to grow. It only needs the fertile ground of our insecurities. One night, 6 months after the wedding, Emma found James in his private study, drinking scotch from a bottle that had belonged to his grandfather. It was late, past midnight, and the desk lamp cast dramatic shadows on his tired face. "You can't sleep," she said from the doorway, not as a question but as a statement. He looked up, and in his eyes Emma saw something she had never seen before. Defeat. "I'm tired," he admitted, and she knew he wasn't talking about the kind of tiredness that's cured with sleep. "Tired of fighting ghosts from the past I shouldn't have to justify. Tired of every decision I made before knowing you being used as a weapon against us." Emma entered and sat on the edge of the desk, a position that would have been unthinkable for her months ago. "Victoria wants you back. Victoria wants what she can't have," James corrected. "She never really wanted me. She wanted the last name, the position, the power. When she discovered I wanted more than that I wanted real connection, we separated. It was her idea, by the way, though she now rewrites history." "And why is she here now?" James sighed, swirling the whiskey in his hand, the golden liquid capturing the light like liquid gold. "Because the company is at its best moment in decades, partly thanks to your ideas. Because the media talks about us positively. Because now we're not just rich but respected. And for people like Victoria, that's irresistible." "She's beautiful," Emma said quietly. "She's empty," he replied, looking at her directly. "Beautiful on the outside like an empty cathedral, impressive but soulless. You—" He stood and took her hands. "You're like those small churches in forgotten towns you find when you get lost driving. From the outside they look simple, but when you enter, you discover 15th century frescoes, carvings made with love, living history in every stone. You have substance, Emma. You have soul." She wanted to believe. God, how much she wanted to believe. But the seeds of doubt Victoria had planted had deep roots. That underground tension finally exploded at a dinner at the Montgomery family estate, where James had been summoned for an important family matter. The house was a 1920s mansion in Connecticut, with gardens that looked like they came from Versailles and a stone facade that had seen generations born and die. The family matriarch, Margaret Montgomery, a 72-year-old woman with the bearing of a queen and the heart of an iceberg, presided over a table that seemed the length of a runway. There were 18 people present: uncles, cousins, James's younger brother who managed operations in Boston, and of course Victoria, invited as an old family friend. The service was impeccable, the dishes a succession of culinary delights that Emma barely touched. The conversation flowed in interspersed English and French, references to places she had never been, people she would never meet, family historical events where she was the eternal stranger. It was during dessert, a crème brûlée that melted in the mouth like clouds with caramel flavor, that Margaret delivered the blow she had been preparing all evening. She delicately wiped the corner of her lips with an embroidered linen napkin and said, with the precision of a surgeon using a scalpel, "Emma, dear, I hope you understand that this world has its own rules. It's not like, well, like the markets where you grew up. Here last names matter, history matters, upbringing matters, and while I appreciate your enthusiasm to learn, there are certain things that simply cannot be taught. Either you have them or you don't. And it concerns me, truly concerns me, that James might regret having acted so impulsively." The silence that fell over the table was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Emma felt all eyes on her, some compassionate, others curious, waiting to see how the girl from Brooklyn would react when put in her place. But Emma had spent her entire life being underestimated and had developed a tougher skin than it appeared. She wiped her mouth with her own napkin, took a sip of wine to buy time, and then spoke with a calm that surprised even James. "Mrs. Montgomery, you're right that I wasn't born into this world. I didn't dine with senators. I didn't summer in mansions. I didn't learn French with private tutors. What I learned was much more valuable. I learned to survive. I learned that kindness costs nothing but is worth everything. I learned that people who build things with their own hands deserve as much respect as those who inherit last names. And yes, maybe James acted impulsively when he married me. But at least it was a decision based on real feelings, not on maintaining empty lineages or impressing societies that measure human value by the antiquity of their silver flatware." She stood up, legs trembling but head held high. "Excuse me, but I've lost my appetite. James, I'll take a cab home if you prefer to stay with your family." James stood so quickly his chair fell backward. "I'm going with you, and let it be clear to everyone, Emma is my family now. If you can't respect her, then we won't have more dinners like this." They left together under the astonished gazes of the Montgomery family, Victoria watching with a mixture of rage and fascination, Margaret with her mouth slightly open in shock. Probably the first time in decades someone had responded to her like that. In the car ride home, Emma cried for the first time in months, releasing all the accumulated tension. James drove in silence, letting her vent, his hand squeezing hers whenever the crying intensified. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I ruined your relationship with your family." "You didn't ruin anything," he responded firmly, the lights of Manhattan passing like shooting stars through the windows. "You exposed what was already broken, and now maybe we can start to fix it for real." Sometimes the most difficult battles are not against external enemies, but against the expectations others have of who we should be. It was during a getaway to Cape Cod, 3 weeks after the family disaster, that the deepest crack appeared. James had insisted they needed time alone, away from New York, away from the stairs, away from everything that defined them except themselves. They rented a private beach house in Provincetown, a hidden paradise where the Atlantic Ocean sparkled in impossible shades of turquoise and deep blue, where pine trees whispered secrets to the salty wind, and where there was no one but them. The first 3 days were perfect. They had breakfast on the deck overlooking the ocean, spent afternoons swimming in secret coves accessible only by sandy trails, dined on fresh seafood bought directly from local fishermen at the small harbor. Emma felt she could finally breathe, that the survival armor she had worn in New York could be set aside. But on the 4th night, while sharing a bottle of local wine on the deck under a sky full of stars that looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet, James said something that would change everything. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you long ago, but I was afraid of how you'd take it." Emma's stomach contracted. In her experience, nothing good followed those words. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves breaking on the sand. James took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to submerge in deep waters. "Our marriage. Initially, it was my father's idea. Not in the sense that he forced me, but the company was going through an image crisis 2 years ago. There were corruption scandals at the executive level, though I wasn't involved. Investors were nervous. My father suggested I needed to stabilize myself, get married, show an image of family responsibility." Each word was like a stone falling into Emma's stomach. "So you chose me because you needed a wife for public relations?" "No," he said quickly, turning to look at her directly. "Listen to me completely before drawing conclusions. My father suggested I get married, yes, but I resisted for 2 years. I dated Victoria during that time because she fit the role, but it was empty. We broke up because I couldn't pretend anymore. And then I saw you. You saw me? At the Brooklyn flea market, a 1.5 years ago. I'd gone looking for a birthday gift for my mother, something authentic instead of the expensive, soulless things we usually buy, and I saw you helping an elderly lady carry her bags to a bench, not because they were paying you, not because someone was watching, just because it was the right thing to do. You stayed with her half an hour, listening to stories of her life, and when you left, you slipped money into one of her bags." Emma vaguely remembered that day. The lady had been a former seamstress like her mother, and they had connected immediately. "I followed you," James admitted, and at Emma's expression quickly added, "I know it sounds terrible, but I needed to know if you were real. I spent 2 months learning about you, your family, your work, your life. And what I discovered broke me and rebuilt me at the same time. Here was this extraordinary woman, kind in a world that gave her no reasons to be so, strong without losing her humanity, intelligent but without arrogance. And I decided that if I had to marry to save the company, it would be with someone real, with you." "So you investigated me like I was a product?" Emma's voice was dangerously calm. "I got to know you because I knew if I asked you on a normal date, you'd say no. A girl from Brooklyn doesn't go out with a millionaire without thinking there's some trick. I needed a way into your world, without all your defenses going up automatically. And the solution was a marriage based on secret investigations." Emma stood, needing distance. The wine that had been sweet minutes before now tasted bitter on her tongue. James also stood, but didn't approach, respecting her space even now. "It was a marriage based on me falling in love with you months before you knew my name. Yes, the circumstances were imperfect. Yes, there were external pressures, but the feelings were and are completely real. Every moment since that first night has been real. I chose you not because I needed a wife, but because I couldn't imagine choosing anyone else. And you expected this to make me feel better?" Emma turned, tears flowing freely now. "All this time I thought that maybe, just maybe, something good had happened to me. that someone had seen me and genuinely chosen me. But it turns out I was part of a plan, of a strategy. How can I trust something that started with half-truths? Because the last 6 months haven't been a lie, James said, his voice breaking. Every conversation, every laugh, every time I supported you in meetings or held you when you cried, every promise I made to you, all of that was real. The circumstances that brought us together may have been imperfect, but what we built is genuine. And yes, I should have told you this before, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it hurts to breathe. But I can't regret the decisions that led me to you. Emma couldn't process all of this. She needed space, time, air. I need to be alone, she said, walking toward the beach. James didn't follow, though every fiber of his being wanted to. Emma spent hours walking along the shore, waves lapping at her bare feet, the moon casting a silver path over the sea as if pointing to an escape route. She reviewed every moment of the last 6 months with new perspective. What had been real? What had been performance? But the more she thought, the more she realized there was no way to fake the kind of attention James had given her. You can't falsify the vulnerability he had shown, the tears on their first night together, the way he defended her against his family. At dawn, she returned to the house and found him exactly where she had left him, on the deck, sleepless, waiting. He looked devastated, years older than yesterday, and Emma felt something soften in her chest. I need time, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I need to process this. But I'm staying. For now, I'm staying. The relief on James's face was like watching the sun rise after a storm. Truth can hurt more than lies, but only truth can be the foundation of something lasting. The months that followed were a delicate dance between approach and distance. Emma plunged into work with a ferocity that surprised everyone. If the foundations of her marriage had been questioned, then she would build something of her own, something no one could take away or question. She took the Southern Hotels project and expanded it, created an initiative called American Roots that connected local artisans from across the country with international markets. Visited pottery workshops in North Carolina, master quilters in Pennsylvania, weavers in New Mexico, woodworkers in Vermont. She learned about profit margins, supply chains, digital marketing, all while keeping humanity at the center of the project. They're not suppliers, she explained to executives in a presentation that would leave even the most skeptical speechless. They're artists, heirs to traditions that are centuries old. Our job isn't just to buy their products, it's to amplify their voices, ensure their crafts survive. Every piece we sell comes with a card telling the artisan's story. Each work bears the name of who created it. We're not selling products. We're selling human connection in a world that's lost it. The project was a resounding success. Sales exceeded all projections. International fashion magazines wrote laudatory articles about how Montgomery Enterprises was revolutionizing conscious luxury. Emma was invited to speak at universities, appear on podcasts about social entrepreneurship, be a panelist at business conferences. But professional success didn't fill the void that had appeared in her marriage. She and James coexisted politely, like well-mannered housemates. They dined together, discussed the company, but the emotional intimacy that had existed before had evaporated like water under the American sun. One afternoon, 7 months after Cape Cod, Emma was in her office reviewing proposals when Helen, the housekeeper, appeared with tea and a worried expression. "Forgive me for intruding, dear," Helen said, closing the door behind her. "But I've worked with this family for 30 years and I need to say something. Mr. James is dying inside." Emma looked up from the documents. "Helen, I appreciate your concern, but he's losing weight, he doesn't sleep. I hear him walking around the house at 3 in the morning, and I know you're not sleeping either. I see you both suffering in the same space but not touching, and it's like watching 2 plants dying of thirst when they're side by side." "It's complicated," Emma said weakly. "Love always is," Helen replied, with the wisdom of someone who has lived long. "But complicated doesn't mean impossible. It means you have to decide if it's worth fighting for. And from where I stand, I see 2 people who love each other deeply but are too afraid to be vulnerable again." That conversation echoed in Emma for days. She watched James again, really watched him. She noticed the small gestures that had never ceased. How he still left good morning notes, though she responded with monosyllables. How he had memorized exactly how she liked her coffee. How he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, as if memorizing her face in case one day she decided to leave forever. Forgiving is not forgetting, but deciding that the future you could build is worth more than the pain of the past. The healing began in an unexpected place, the kitchen at midnight. Emma had come down because she couldn't sleep and found James there, trying to make chocolate chip cookies with variable success. The kitchen was chaos with spilled flour and half-mixed dough. "What are you doing?" she asked, unable to avoid a small smile at the chaos. He turned, surprised, with a wooden spoon in hand and flour inexplicably in his hair. "Your mother taught me to make these years ago. Said someday I'd surprise you by making them for you. I thought maybe... I don't know. It's stupid." It wasn't stupid. It was the sweetest thing Emma had seen in months. "You're doing it wrong," she said, approaching. "The oven's too hot and you need to chill the dough first." They worked together in silence, their hands occasionally touching as they baked. It was the first time in months they had been in the same space without the tension of unresolved conversations floating between them. When they finished, the cookies weren't perfect, but they were honest. They ate at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room, just the two of them at 2 in the morning with cookies and cold milk. And for the first time in 7 months they talked, really talked. "It still hurts," Emma admitted. "Not the part about you investigating me. I understand that in a twisted way. It hurts that you thought you needed to trick me into getting close to you, as if the real me wasn't enough to choose you on my own." "I thought I was protecting you," James said, "from expectations, from pressures, from everything that comes with my world. I thought if I just showed you the love without all the complicated details of how we got there, we could build something pure. But I was wrong. I deprived you of your choice, and that was unfair, no matter how good my intentions were." "And now," Emma asked, "how do we move forward from here?" "We start over," he suggested. "But for real this time. No secrets, no omissions. Ask me whatever you want to know, and I swear by everything I love I'll tell you the truth, even if it makes me look bad." They spent the rest of the early morning talking. James told everything, his father's pressures, the moments when he had doubted, the times he had wanted to confess but couldn't find the right moment. Emma shared her own fears, the nights she had considered leaving, the constant comparisons with Victoria that ate at her. When the sun began to light the sky, they weren't healed, but they were closer. And that was enough for now. But just when they seemed to find their way back to each other, fate had prepared another test. One of the projects Emma had passionately defended, an investment in a sustainable technology startup called Ecotech Solutions that promised to revolutionize plastic recycling, collapsed spectacularly. The news came during a board meeting where Emma was presenting quarterly results. Her phone buzzed with an urgent message from the legal team. Ecotech's founders had been arrested for fraud. The technology they claimed to have didn't exist. The millions Montgomery Enterprises had invested, that Emma had convinced the board to invest against their initial doubts, had evaporated. Emma felt the world stop. All the faces in the conference room turned to her, some with compassion, others with the barely hidden satisfaction of those who had expected the girl from Brooklyn to eventually stumble spectacularly. "I need to... excuse me," she managed to say, before leaving the room, legs trembling. She locked herself in the executive floor bathroom, gripping the marble sink edge while her reflection stared back. A woman who had forgotten for a moment who she was, who had believed the story that she belonged in that world. The following weeks were hell. Financial media covered the scandal. Though Montgomery Enterprises wasn't the only affected company, Emma received disproportionate attention. "CEO's inexperienced wife makes million-dollar decisions," read one headline. "From flea markets to boardrooms, an expensive experiment," said another. Victoria, of course, appeared at a charity event a week later with her most venomous sympathy. "Oh, Emma, you must be devastated. These mistakes are hard even for experienced professionals. I can't imagine what it must be like for someone who's learning." Emma spent entire nights reviewing every document, every conversation with the founders, looking for signs she should have seen. How had she been so naive, so eager to prove her worth that she had ignored warning signs? The numbers danced before her eyes. $8.5 million. Gone. Because of her. James tried to comfort her, but Emma had locked herself in a fortress of self-reproach. "You don't understand," she told him one night when he tried to hug her. "You were born into this world. You can make mistakes, and people see it as calculated risk. I make one mistake and it confirms all their prejudices about me never deserving to be here. That's not true, James insisted. Everyone makes mistakes. I've lost more money than that on failed investments. But do you remember how you felt the first time? Emma looked at him with eyes red from crying. That feeling that maybe everyone was right to doubt you. That's how I feel every damn day of my life here. And now I gave them reason. What James hadn't told her, because he knew she would reject it, was that he had absorbed the loss personally, transferring funds from his private accounts to the company so the impact on Emma's books would be less. He had reviewed all the documentation with 3 law firms and confirmed that Emma had done proper due diligence correctly. The scammers were simply very good at what they did. But Emma didn't want to be protected. She wanted to earn her place on her own merit. The distance between them grew again, this time not from secrets but from wounded pride and fear. One early morning, 2 weeks after the disaster, James went down to the study and found Emma surrounded by papers and legal documents, her laptop showing loss graphs. She had deep circles under her eyes, unwashed hair pulled into a careless bun, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. "How long have you been here?" he asked from the doorway. "Does it matter?" Her voice was hoarse from not using it for hours. James entered and instead of trying to get her out of there or give a motivational speech, simply sat on the floor next to her chair, the cold hardwood floor against his back, his designer suit wrinkling without him caring. "Did I ever tell you about my first big failure?" he began, looking at the ceiling with its crown molding. "James, I don't need—" "I was 26, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "My father had just given me control of one of our subsidiaries, a tech distributor. I invested everything in a mobile phone company right before the iPhone changed the entire market. I lost $23 million in 8 months. I had to lay off 150 people, people with families, with mortgages, with lives. And every face as they cleaned out their desks is burned into my memory." Emma stopped typing, listening now. "For months I thought my father was right, that I wasn't ready, that it had been a mistake to give me responsibility. I considered resigning, leaving everything, moving to some remote island and being anyone else. And then my grandfather, who was very sick at the time, asked me to visit him. He sat me exactly where I am now on the floor of his study and told me something I never forgot." "What did he say?" Emma asked quietly. "He said, 'The difference between people who build empires and people who simply work in them is that builders get up one more time than the times they fall, not because they're smarter or stronger, but because they understand that failure is the price of ambition, and they're willing to pay it again and again.'" And then he showed me a box. James paused, emotion making his voice tremble slightly. In that box were documents of all his failures. Companies that went bankrupt, lost investments, people he trusted who betrayed him. There were decades of mistakes there. And he told me, each of these was a lesson that made me better. Don't hide your failures, James. Study them, learn from them, and use them to build something stronger. Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw how you looked at yourself in the mirror today when you thought I wasn't watching. I saw someone who had lost faith in herself, and I can't let that happen, Emma. Not because you're my wife, but because you're one of the most brilliant people I've met, and the world needs what you have to offer. This mistake doesn't define you. How you rise from it does." For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed someone to see her truly vulnerable. She slid from the chair to the floor beside James, and for a long moment they just sat there, back to back on the cold floor, sharing the weight of their failures. "How do you know it's worth getting up?" she finally asked. "Because the alternative is giving up, and giving up means everyone who doubted you was right. And I know with every fiber of my being that they were wrong about you." Emma turned her head to look at him, and James did the same, their eyes meeting with an honesty that had been absent too long. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid to try again and fail. Afraid that deep down Victoria and your grandmother and everyone else are right. That I'm just a good person who's completely out of place in this world." "Then let's build a different world," James said. "One where people like you aren't the exception but the rule. Where compassion and emotional intelligence matter as much as expensive university degrees. Where someone can come from Brooklyn and not just sit at the table, but define the rules of the conversation." For the first time in weeks, Emma smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was real. That sounds beautiful. It also sounds impossible. Most things worth having are, he replied, taking her hand. But you know what's really impossible? Me not believing in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. Failure is inevitable when we risk doing great things. Defeat only comes when we let failure be the final word. 3 more weeks passed before Emma felt she could breathe again, without the weight of shame crushing her. Slowly she began to rebuild. She implemented new verification protocols for future investments, not with the previous blind enthusiasm, but with hard-won wisdom. She learned to ask better questions, to trust her instinct but verify facts, to accept that caution wasn't cowardice, but intelligence. But while her professional confidence gradually healed, she discovered something that would put her on a completely different path. She had been feeling nauseous in the mornings for 2 weeks, which she had attributed to stress. But when she started getting dizzy during meetings and having strange cravings for pickles with chocolate, a combination she would normally find disgusting, she knew she needed to take a test. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub in her private bathroom, staring at those 2 lines as if they were a message written in a language she didn't completely understand. A baby. She was pregnant. At the worst possible time, when she was barely recovering from a devastating professional failure, when her marriage was stable but still fragile, when she herself still struggled to feel sufficiently capable. For 2 weeks, she kept the secret. She went to work, smiled in meetings, dined with James discussing company strategies, and at night lay awake with a hand on her still flat abdomen, wondering how it would be possible to bring a life into a world where she herself still searched for her place. She scheduled an appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital with absolute discretion. Dr. Martinez, an efficient woman about 50 years old with gentle hands and a reassuring voice, confirmed what Emma already knew. She was pregnant, approximately 2 months along. Everything seemed normal and healthy. She should be excited, but what she felt was panic. "How do you feel about this?" the doctor asked, noticing Emma's pallor, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the test results. "How am I supposed to feel?" Emma heard herself ask, her voice sounding strange and distant even to her own ears. "There's no right way to feel," the doctor responded gently. "Every woman reacts differently. But I do see a lot of fear in your eyes, and that concerns me. Is there someone you can talk to? Does your husband know?" Emma shook her head. "Not yet. It's just that I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready." "Most mothers feel that way, Doctor," Martinez said, writing some prescriptions for prenatal vitamins. "But there's a difference between normal nervousness and something deeper. If what you're feeling is more than transitory anxiety, we need to talk about it. There are resources, support." Emma nodded, took the prescriptions and pamphlets about prenatal care, and left the hospital feeling like she was walking underwater. The world continued around her, young couples pushing baby strollers down the sidewalk, an elderly woman selling flowers on the corner, students laughing on their way to class. But she was in a separate bubble, processing this new reality that was literally growing inside her. During those 2 weeks of secrecy, Emma observed James in a new way. She saw him interacting with Helen when she told stories about her grandchildren, the way his eyes lit up with tales of the children's antics. She saw him at charity events talking to teenagers from the scholarship program the company financed, genuinely interested in their dreams and aspirations. She saw him give excessively generous tips to the young man who delivered food, because James had noticed the guy was studying law and working to pay for college. But what really changed her perspective was a seemingly small incident. The company had to lay off a mid-level manager due to budget cuts post-Ecotech scandal. The man, Robert, about 55 with a family to support, was understandably devastated. Emma witnessed from the door of James's office how he not only gave a generous severance package, but spent 3 hours helping him update his resume, making personal calls to his contacts at other companies. And finally, when Robert broke down in tears, fearing he couldn't pay his daughter's tuition, James personally wrote a check to cover 2 years of college. "You can't tell anyone," James said to Robert. "This is between us, and it's not charity, it's investment. Your daughter is studying environmental engineering, and someday when she's brilliant and innovative, I hope she remembers that someone believed in her. Emma walked away from that door with tears in her eyes, something solidifying in her chest. She saw James not just as her husband or as the CEO of a company, but as a human being with a capacity for kindness he chose to exercise even when no one was watching. Sometimes we judge people's character not by their public gestures, but by what they do when they believe no one is observing. It was on an ordinary afternoon, while walking through Chelsea Market, where smells of fresh bread competed with vendors' voices offering artisan cheese, that Emma decided it was time. They stopped at a small stall selling homemade cupcakes, James's favourite since childhood, and while they ate standing up, surrounded by the market bustle, by families buying dinner ingredients and tourists taking photos, Emma gathered all her courage. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it over the market noise. James turned to her, immediately reading the seriousness in her voice. He set his half-eaten cupcake on a disposable plate. "What is it?" Emma took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." James's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Shock, joy, confusion, hope, fear. "Pregnant? How? When? Are you sure?" 2 months. I went to the doctor 2 weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I needed to process. "James, I'm scared." He pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the market, not caring who saw them. "What are you afraid of?" he asked against her hair. "Of not being enough, of bringing a child into a world where I'm still finding my way, of our child growing up feeling their mother is inadequate, doesn't belong, of repeating mistakes." Her voice failed. James held her tighter, and Emma felt something wet fall on her hair. He was crying. "Listen to me," he said with a trembling voice. "You're going to be an incredible mother, because you know exactly what it's like to struggle, what it's like to doubt yourself, and still choose to be kind. This child will grow up knowing that value doesn't come from last names or bank accounts, but from how you treat people when no one rewards you for it. And you don't have to do this alone. We're going to learn together." "What if I fail again?" Emma whispered against his chest. "Then you'll fail as a mother, but you'll get up as a mother, and our child will learn that falling isn't the end of the world, but just the beginning of learning to get up." For the first time since she saw those 2 pink lines, Emma felt something like hope. It wasn't complete certainty, it wasn't an absence of fear, but it was enough to start. But the universe, it seemed, hadn't finished testing their capacity for resilience. 3 weeks after Emma shared her pregnancy with James, when they were just beginning to adapt to the idea of becoming parents, life threw a curve they hadn't seen coming. It was a particularly tense board meeting, discussing the possible acquisition of a hotel chain in the Midwest. The numbers didn't add up for some board members. Voices were rising. The air conditioning seemed insufficient for 20 heated people in a conference room. James was in the middle of a particularly intense argument with one of the principal investors when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His hand went to his chest, his face losing all color in seconds. He began, but the words didn't come out. And then, like a majestic tree falling, James collapsed. The panic that followed was surreal for Emma, who watched from her seat as if viewing a movie in slow motion. People screaming, someone calling 911, the security chief starting CPR, she herself running to him, falling to her knees next to his motionless body on the grey, neutral corporate carpeting. "James? No, 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 no." Emma held his hand, which was cold, too cold. "Stay with me, please, stay with me. You haven't taught us how to make those cookies right yet. We haven't chosen names for the baby yet. We haven't—" The paramedics arrived in what seemed like hours, but were only 6 minutes. They stabilized him right there, connecting him to portable machines that beeped with blood-chilling urgency. "Possible cardiac arrest," Emma heard one of them say. "We need to move him now." The trip to the hospital was a blurred nightmare. Emma rode in the ambulance, holding James's hand, talking to him constantly, though he didn't respond. His eyes closed, his breathing assisted by an oxygen mask that fogged and cleared with each difficult breath. "Don't leave me," she whispered over and over, like a mantra, like a prayer. "Not when we were finally finding our way. Not when we still have so much ahead. Don't be such a coward as to leave right now." At Mount Sinai Hospital, the same where Emma had discovered her pregnancy just a month before, a team of cardiologists waited. They wheeled him away on a gurney, the emergency double doors closing behind him and leaving Emma alone in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Helen arrived 30 minutes later, having received a call from Charles, the driver. She found Emma sitting on the waiting room floor, hugging her knees, rocking slightly in shock. The older woman sat beside her, without words, just presence. "This is my fault," Emma finally spoke, her voice monotone. "The stress of everything, of the investment failure, of my pregnancy, of trying to keep our relationship afloat while we both fought our demons. I was killing him, and I was so absorbed in my own problems, I didn't see it." "No," Helen said firmly, taking her cold hands. "Mr. James has been working like crazy for 30 years. He's been under stress since I've known him. This isn't your fault, dear. This is the result of a man who never learned to rest, who always put everyone else before himself. What if he doesn't survive?" The question came out in a broken whisper. "What if the last thing I said was that I was scared about the baby? What if he thought I didn't want him, that I regretted everything?" "He knows you love him," Helen said with absolute certainty. "Anyone who has seen you two together knows. And he'll survive because he's stubborn as a mule, and because he has something to live for now. 2 people, actually." The surgery lasted 8 hours. 8 hours during which Emma refused to move from that waiting room, refused food, barely drank water, just existed in a limbo of terror and negotiations with whatever God might be listening. "If you let him live, I'll be better. I'll be the wife he needs, the mother our child deserves. I'll work on my patience, my fear, my insecurities. Just let him live." Dr. Chen, a cardiologist in his 50s with a serious expression but kind eyes, finally emerged at 3 in the morning. Emma stood so quickly she felt dizzy, probably from lack of food and the pregnancy. Helen steadied her. "Your husband is stable," he began, and Emma felt her legs give way. Helen held her. "He had a massive heart attack caused by a combination of factors: chronic stress, undiagnosed hypertension, and a congenital heart condition that apparently no one knew he had. It was lucky he was in a meeting surrounded by people when it happened. 10 minutes later, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Is he going to—" Emma couldn't finish the question. "He's going to live," the doctor confirmed. "But his life is going to change dramatically. He'll need lifelong medication, radical lifestyle changes, stress reduction. No intense work for at least 6 months. He's 40 years old, Mrs. Montgomery, but his heart is that of someone 60. He needs to treat it as such." Emma nodded, tears of relief and terror mixing on her cheeks. "Can I see him?" "He's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but you can be with him. Room 412. Room 412 became Emma's world for the next 3 days. James woke the afternoon of the second day confused, with tubes coming out of places that should never have tubes, connected to machines that monitored every beat of his rebellious heart. The first thing he saw was Emma, curled in a chair beside the bed, sleeping in a position that looked uncomfortable, one hand extended, touching his arm as if to make sure he was still there. "Emma!" His voice came out raspy, barely audible over the constant beeping of monitors. She woke instantly, her eyes opening wide and filling with tears seeing him conscious. "You're awake, thank God you're awake." "What happened?" he asked, trying to orient himself. "Your heart decided 30 years of stress were enough and went on strike," Emma said, trying to be light but her voice failing. "You gave us a death scare, idiot, literally." James tried to sit up, but a sharp pain stopped him. Emma adjusted the bed so he could be semi-upright. "How long have I been out?" 2 days. They did bypass surgery. The doctor says you're going to live, but your workaholic life is over. You hear that? Over." He tried to smile, but it was weak. "And the baby? Are you okay?" "The baby's fine. I'm going to be okay now that I know I'm not going to be a widow at 22. Emma took his hand, careful with the IVs. "James, you were right about something. Life is too short to waste on fear. I almost lost you before we could really begin, before we could be parents together, before we could get past all the baggage we both carry. I'm sorry," he said, tears rolling from his temples to the hospital pillow. "I'm sorry for not taking care of myself, for not being more aware. Our child almost grew up without a father before meeting me." "But it didn't happen," Emma said firmly. "You're here. We have a second chance, and we're going to use it, understand? We're both going to be better. I'm going to work on trusting myself and you. You're going to learn that the world won't end if you delegate, if you rest, if you live like a human being instead of a machine. James nodded weakly, exhausted just from this brief conversation. Promise? He asked like a child seeking reassurance. Promise, Emma replied, kissing his forehead. Now sleep. We have the rest of our lives to work it all out. Sometimes we need to be on the verge of losing everything to understand what really matters. James's recovery was slow, and for him, frustrating beyond words. A man who had built an empire by being tireless, now tired walking from the bed to the bathroom. Emma became his primary caregiver, insisting on being there for every meal, every medication, every small advance. But she also became something more, the leader the company needed. The board, facing the sudden absence of their CEO, had no choice but to give Emma interim operational control. It was that or bring in an outside executive, and none of them wanted a stranger seeing the internal books during this vulnerable period. The first week was chaotic. Emma found herself making decisions that normally would require 3 meetings and 5 signatures. But something strange happened. She discovered she was good at this. Without the weight of feeling like an imposter, because she literally was an imposter, in the sense that she had never applied for this role, she could make decisions based purely on what she thought was right. She implemented policies she had been considering for months, but had hesitated to propose. More flexible work hours for parents, mental health initiatives for employees, mentorship programs that paired senior executives with junior employees from diverse backgrounds. She met with each department, not from a podium but sitting with them, asking what they needed, what worked, what didn't. One day, one of the oldest executives, Mr. Richardson, a man who had been openly skeptical about her from the beginning, stopped her in the hallway. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need to tell you something." Emma braced for criticism. "Yes? I was wrong about you," he said simply, with an honesty that must have cost his considerable pride. "I thought you were just a pretty girl that James had chosen for reasons that weren't professional. But these last 2 weeks, the decisions you've made, the way you've managed the transition, you've been more effective than the last 3 interims we've had. You have instinct." Emma felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson. That means a lot, especially coming from you. Just don't tell Mr. James I said you're better than him," he added with a wink, "or I'll be in trouble when he comes back." But James was struggling with his own version of getting better. Accustomed to controlling everything, to being needed, to being indispensable, he was now forced to watch from the margins, while his wife did exactly what the doctors had forbidden him to do. Every night, Emma came home, not to their home but to a private rehabilitation facility where James would spend 6 weeks recovering, and told him about her day, the meetings, the decisions, the challenges. At first, he listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions, advice, but slowly Emma noticed a change. He became quieter, more withdrawn. One night she entered to find him staring out the window at the lit gardens, his dinner untouched on the tray beside the bed. "Not hungry?" she asked, worried. The doctors had been clear about the importance of maintaining a healthy diet. "Not really," he replied without looking at her. Emma sat in the chair by his bed, studying his profile. "What's going on, James? And don't tell me nothing because I know you better than that now." He remained silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was full of a vulnerability she had rarely heard. "Hearing you talk about everything you're accomplishing, everything you're changing, it should make me happy, and part of me is proud, genuinely proud. But another part what? Another part is afraid you'll realize you don't need me." The words came out in a rush, as if they had been pressing to get out for days. "That you can run the company without me, live your life without me, raise our child without me. That my only value was being the powerful CEO, and now that that's gone, what's left?" Emma felt her heart break a little. Here was this man who had seemed so invincible, so confident, reduced to his own fears and insecurities. The same fears she had carried throughout their marriage, he was now experiencing from the other side. "James, look at me," she said firmly. He obeyed slowly. "Remember what you told me at the market when I told you about the baby? You said I didn't have to do it alone, that we were going to learn together, remember?" He nodded. "Well, it works both ways. Yes, I'm managing the company now, and it's terrifying and exciting and showing me I'm capable of more than I thought. But it doesn't replace you. Nothing could replace you, because I didn't fall in love with the CEO. I fell in love with the man who knelt on our first night and promised to be gentle. With the man who cries when he reads letters from artisans thanking us for changing their lives. With the man who secretly donated money for an employee's daughter because he believed in her future. Silent tears ran down James's face now. Your value doesn't come from what you do, but from who you are, Emma continued, taking his hands. And if anything, this experience is showing us we can be true partners. Not you leading and me following, or me leading and you following, but both of us leading together, each contributing what we have. That makes us stronger, not weaker. But what if I can't come back? He asked, his deepest fear finally verbalized. What if the doctors say the stress of running the company is too much? What do I do with my life then? Then we live, Emma replied simply. Maybe not the way we planned. Maybe you have to reinvent what success means to you. Maybe you become that father who's present for every moment, while I balance career and motherhood. Maybe you write that book about ethical business you always wanted to write. Maybe we just exist without having to justify every moment with productivity. Would that be so terrible? James considered this, and for the first time in weeks, some of the tension left his shoulders. When you put it that way, it sounds like a pretty good life. It's more than good, Emma said, carefully curling up next to him on the hospital bed, aware of the tubes and wires but needing the closeness. It's a real life, and after everything we've been through, I think we both deserve something real. Strength is not never needing help. It's having the courage to accept it when you need it. 3 months after the heart attack, James was discharged with strict instructions. No full-time work for at least 3 more months, moderate daily exercise, strict diet, stress management through therapy and meditation. For a man who had built his identity around work and control, it was like asking a fish to live out of water. But there was something different this time. He had Emma, yes, but more importantly, he had seen what it was to almost lose everything. That experience had reordered his priorities in a way that no amount of motivational lectures or self-help books had accomplished. The first days at home were strange. Emma already had an established routine: wake at 6, an hour of gentle prenatal exercise recommended by her doctor, breakfast while checking urgent emails, at the office by 8. James woke later, had breakfast alone or with Helen if she was available. Then, what? What did a CEO without a company to run do? He started with small things. He read all the books he had bought over the years, promising himself he'd read them when he had time. He began to cook, something he had never done because there had always been staff for that. The first attempts were comical disasters: beans that looked like rocks, rice that turned to mush, fish so overcooked it could be used as a shoe sole. But he persisted, watching YouTube videos, calling his grandmother for traditional recipes, experimenting. One evening, 6 weeks after his discharge, Emma came home exhausted after a particularly difficult day negotiating with a workers' union threatening to strike. The last thing she expected was to find the dining room table decorated with candles, soft music by Bill Evans playing in the background, and James with an apron, a joke gift from Helen that said, "Kiss the cook," serving what appeared to be a perfectly prepared coq au vin. "What's all this?" Emma asked, genuinely surprised. "I thought you deserved a night where someone took care of you for a change," James replied, pulling out her chair with an exaggerated bow. "Besides, I needed to test if my coq au vin is up to my grandmother's level. She gave me instructions over the phone for 2 hours. Emma tasted a bite and had to admit it was excellent. Not perfect. The wine was slightly more reduced than ideal, but made with love, which made it better than any fancy restaurant meal. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. During dinner, they talked not about the company or problems, but about simple things. The way the sunset light came through the dining room windows, creating golden patterns on the hardwood floor, baby names they had been considering. James loved William, while Emma preferred something less common like Milo or Jasper. Plans to convert one of the rooms into a nursery that didn't look like it came from a magazine, but was truly warm and welcoming. "It's delicious," she said honestly. "Who are you and what did you do with my workaholic husband?" James laughed, and it was the first real, relaxed laugh Emma had heard from him in months. "I'm still here. I'm just learning to be more than that. I want our child to grow up knowing the best gifts are moments, not things, James said, his hand resting gently on Emma's now noticeably rounded abdomen. I want to read stories to them every night, not because it's a duty, but because I genuinely want to know what adventures they had that day. You already sound like a father, Emma observed with a smile. I feel like one, he admitted. And it's scary because I didn't have the best model. My father was always absent, and when he was present, it was to give lessons about business, not about life. I don't want that for our child. You won't be that, Emma said with certainty. You're already different. Just the fact that you're aware of it makes you different. As James gradually reintegrated into the company, only part-time, only in advisory functions, only in absolutely necessary meetings, Emma continued thriving in her leadership role. But something beautiful was happening. They were becoming a true team. They implemented something they called pillow meetings, nightly conversations before sleep, where each shared one success, one challenge, and one thing they were grateful for that day. It was simple, but it created a space of vulnerability and mutual celebration. Success: negotiated a deal with craft distillery suppliers from Kentucky for our hotels, Emma would begin one night. Challenge: Mr. Richardson questioned my decision to hire 2 junior female executives without MBAs just because they have incredible field experience. Gratitude: that you can be here to listen to me complain about Mr. Richardson. James would smile. Success: managed to meditate 15 minutes without falling asleep or getting distracted thinking about the stock market. Challenge: accepting that the company is in good hands and I don't need to micromanage everything from here. Gratitude: watching you flourish in something I thought was just my territory. It makes me love you more, not less. The pregnancy progressed. Emma entered her 3rd trimester, with energy still reasonably high, but increasing back pain and swollen feet. James became an expert in foot massages, in cooking strange cravings. Once he had to find cherry ice cream at midnight during a storm because Emma was convinced she would die without it. In being present in ways he didn't know he could. The family was also changing. Margaret Montgomery, the matriarch who had been so cold initially, appeared unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon at the house. Emma was alone, James at one of his cardiac physical therapy sessions. I can come back if it's a bad time, the older woman said from the doorway, without her characteristic haughtiness. No, please, come in, Emma replied, genuinely surprised but polite. They sat in the living room, chamomile tea between them, uncomfortable silence filling the space. Finally, Margaret spoke. I came to apologize, not just for that horrible dinner, but for everything. For judging you without knowing you, for letting my own prejudices about class and lineage blind me to seeing who you really are. I saw how you managed the company during James's crisis. I saw the changes you implemented, how employees respect you not from fear, but from genuine admiration. And I realized that everything I thought mattered, last names, connections, the right blood, is empty compared to character and integrity. Emma was speechless. This was the last thing she expected. James almost died, Margaret continued, her voice faltering slightly. And all I could think was that if we lost him, my last meaningful conversation with him had been telling him he'd made a mistake marrying you. What a terrible legacy to leave. So I'm here to correct that. You're exactly what this family needed, though we were too blind to see it. And your child, my grandchild, will be fortunate to have a mother who understands both the world of privilege and the world where people really work for everything they have. The 2 women cried then, hugging awkwardly over the tea table, healing wounds that had been opened too long. It's never too late to choose humility over pride, connection over being right. As Emma's pregnancy entered the 8th month, the outside world didn't stop pressing. The media was obsessed with the story of the CEO and the Cinderella, as they had reductively labeled their marriage. Every public appearance was photographed, every business decision analyzed, every change in their relationship speculated upon. Emma Montgomery, the new face of female leadership or a convenient casualty, read the headline of a major economic newspaper. The article, though acknowledging her achievements, was full of insinuations about nepotism and luck instead of genuine merit. Victoria, never one to miss an opportunity, gave an anonymous interview, though everyone knew it was her, to a society magazine. It's fascinating to see someone with so little formal preparation make million-dollar decisions, she said. One can only hope she has more qualified people guiding her behind the scenes, for the good of all the employees. Each article, each comment, was another splinter under Emma's skin. She began to doubt again, to question every decision. Had she promoted that employee because they were the best candidate, or because they had a story similar to hers and she wanted to validate her own path? Was she rejecting certain corporate strategies because she genuinely believed there were better alternatives, or because she resented the world that had created them? One night James found her in the home office at 2 in the morning, surrounded by reports and computers showing financial analysis articles. She was crying silently, one hand on her very pregnant belly where their child occasionally kicked, reminding her there was more than just her at stake now. "What if they're right?" she asked when James knelt beside her chair. "What if I'm doing all this motivated by ego, by wanting to prove something, and I end up hurting the company that gave me this opportunity? What if our child grows up and reads these articles and thinks their mother was a fraud?" James took her hands, the same hands that had once trembled holding the edge of a silk robe on their first night together, the same hands that had learned to lead board meetings and create strategic presentations. "Remember what you told me when I was in the hospital, terrified that you didn't need me anymore?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, remembering. "You said my value didn't come from what I did, but from who I was. That works for you too. You're not running this company because you're perfect or because you never make mistakes. You run it because you see the people behind the numbers, because you make decisions based on creating real value, not just maximizing quarterly profits. And yes, you're going to make mistakes. You already made one big one with Ecotech. You'll make more. We all do. But what if that mistake costs someone their job, their family?" Emma's voice was tormented. "Then you learn from it. Do everything you can to mitigate the damage and get up wiser," James replied. "But living paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes isn't living. It's just existing in a small, safe version of what you could be." "I miss when things were simple," Emma admitted. "When my biggest worry was whether I'd sell enough sewing that Sunday at the market to pay the electricity bill." "No, you don't," James said gently but firmly. "You miss the certainty that came with low expectations. No one expected anything from you then, so there was no way to disappoint. But there was also no way to really shine. Now the stakes are higher, yes, but the rewards are too. Not just money or status, but the possibility of creating real change, of showing thousands of employees that leadership can look different, of raising a child who never has to choose between authenticity and ambition." Emma put her head on James's shoulder, exhausted but also relieved not to be alone in this. "Sometimes I wish I could just freeze time, be here in this moment with you, with our baby about to arrive, the company stable, your health improving. Why can't we just stay here?" "Because life isn't one moment, it's millions of them," James said, kissing her forehead. "And some will be beautiful, and others will be terrifying, and most will be complex in ways we can't predict, but we'll face them together. Peace doesn't come from having all the answers, but from trusting you can find them when you need them." The moment that would change everything came in the most unexpected way. Emma was 2 weeks from her due date, moving more like a penguin than a human being, with swollen ankles and constant discomfort that made it hard to sleep more than 2 hours straight. She had reduced her office hours to home consultations, though she remained incredibly active in strategic decisions. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang with a call from Mr. Richardson. "Emma, we need you to come to the office." "There's a situation." "What kind of situation?" she asked, immediately alarmed. "Preferably in person. It's complicated." An hour later, Emma was in the main conference room with the full board, James by her side. He had insisted on accompanying her, though his role was only as an observer now. In the center of the table were documents that explained the inexplicable. One of their main competitors wanted to buy Montgomery Enterprises. The offer was astronomical. Enough for each shareholder to retire richer, beyond their wildest dreams. Enough for Emma, James, and future generations of their family to never have to work again. "It's an incredible offer," said one of the board members, an investor who had been with the company for 15 years. 3 times our current market value. We'll never see anything like this again. "But it means the end of Montgomery Enterprises as an independent entity," Mr. Richardson intervened. "Everything we've built, the brand, the culture, Emma's initiatives with the artisans, Everything would be absorbed into a massive corporation that only sees numbers. The numbers are quite convincing, another member argued. And let's be honest, with James in recovery and Emma about to be a mother, is this really the time to be running a company of this size? Emma listened to the debate for an hour. Arguments for, arguments against, financial projections, risk analyses. And as she listened, she felt something solidify inside her. It wasn't fear this time, it was clarity. "May I speak?" she finally interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos of competing voices. The room fell silent. "A year and a half ago," Emma began, "I married James without really knowing what I was getting into. I thought it was just about him and me. But this company, these employees, these projects we've started, they became part of who I am. Not because I had to, but because I chose them to be." She stood up, one hand on the table for balance, the other on her belly. "This offer is tempting, yes, but selling it now would be like selling my soul just when I finally discovered what I wanted to do with it. You know what makes Montgomery Enterprises special? Not our numbers, though they're good, not our assets, though they're valuable. It's that we remember companies are made of people, not spreadsheets." "With all respect," the investor intervened, "that's very poetic, but shareholders deserve the opportunity to capitalize on their investment." "You're right," Emma conceded. "That's why I propose this. Let's vote. But before voting, I want each of you to spend a day in our operations. Not in an executive office, but on the floor with the real employees. Talk to Maria, who can finally afford her daughter's college for the first time in generations, thanks to our employee scholarships. Talk to Robert in production, who's developing a sustainable product line that could revolutionize our industry. Talk to the artisans in our American Roots projects who now have international markets. And if after that they still vote to sell," asked Mr. Richardson. "Then we sell," Emma said simply. "Because if you don't see the value in what we've built beyond the money, then maybe I'm the only one who does. And if that's the case, I'd rather know now." The proposal was so unusual, so bold, that the board was momentarily speechless. Finally, Margaret Montgomery, who had been silent until now, spoke. "I support Emma's proposal. Let's do what she suggests. 1 week, each board member spends real time in operations, and then we vote. It's the least we can do before making a decision that will affect not just our pockets, but the lives of hundreds of families." The motion was approved, though some did so reluctantly. During the following week, something remarkable happened. Executives accustomed to seeing the company from conference rooms with panoramic views found themselves on the production floor, in meetings with artisans, in focus groups with employees. They saw not just a company, but a community. The skeptical investor spent a day with the American Roots team and met a 78-year-old quilter in Pennsylvania who cried while telling him how Emma had saved a craft that was dying. "My granddaughter is going to learn this now," the elderly woman said. "I thought it would die with me, but now there's a future." Another board member accompanied Emma on a visit to one of the southern hotels. The local manager, a passionate Charlestonian, showed them how they had integrated local jazz artists, how each room told the story of a family from the region, how guests not only stayed but wrote emotional reviews about feeling connected to something real. At the end of the week, the board met again. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no aggressive urgency about the numbers, but contemplative reflection. "I've spent 20 years in business," began the investor who had been most vocal about selling. "And I always thought companies existed to generate returns, period. But this week I saw something different. I saw a company that generates returns and meaning. And I realized that if we sell this to a corporation that only sees the first, we'll destroy the second." One by one, board members shared similar experiences. When it came time to vote, it was unanimous. They wouldn't sell. But there was a change. They proposed that Emma take the official title of CEO, with James as chairman of the board, allowing him strategic influence without the operational stress of day-to-day. It was formal recognition of what was already reality. Emma cried then, not from sadness but from validation. Everything she had worked to prove, not just to others but to herself, had finally been recognized by the people whose approval she once thought she would never get. That night, at home, James prepared a celebration dinner. Nothing elaborate, just simple pasta with fresh tomato sauce from the garden, salad, homemade bread he had learned to make during his recovery. They ate on the terrace under the stars, Emma's belly so large it barely fit at the table. "You did it," James said, raising his glass of water. They had both given up wine, him for health, her for pregnancy. "You didn't just save the company. You transformed it into something I never could have imagined." "We did it," Emma corrected. "Every step of the way, even when we were apart or fighting or scared, we were building this together." And then, as if the universe wanted to put an exclamation point on the moment, Emma felt a contraction. Not painful yet, but definite. "I think the baby decided today is dramatic enough," she said with a nervous laugh. "We should probably go to the hospital." James, who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, immediately went into comical panic. "Now? Are you sure? Where's the hospital bag? Did I call the doctor? Do you need—" "James," Emma laughed, even through another contraction. "Breathe. We have time." Contractions are 15 minutes apart. But the man who had handled million-dollar corporate crises couldn't handle the imminent prospect of fatherhood without becoming an adorable mess. Emma, always the calmer of the two in real crises, had to guide him step by step. Life's most transformative moments rarely come when we expect them, but exactly when we're ready to receive them, whether we know it or not. William James Montgomery was born at 4:47 in the morning on October 15th, weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, and with lungs that immediately made it clear he had inherited his mother's determination. Labor was long, 18 hours that tested every fiber of Emma's endurance, but when they finally held that small, wrinkled, perfect baby against her chest, all the pain evaporated into insignificance. James cried, not silent tears this time, but full sobs, overwhelmed by the reality that this small being was half him, half Emma, and completely their responsibility now. "We're parents," he kept repeating, as if he couldn't believe it. "We're actually parents." "That was generally the idea when I got pregnant," Emma joked weakly. Exhausted but radiant in a way James had only occasionally seen in their life together. This wasn't borrowed or circumstance-dependent happiness. It was pure joy, the kind that comes from knowing you've completed something fundamental and done it well. The first days at home with William were chaotic, in ways no amount of preparation had really anticipated. Babies, it turned out, don't read parenting books. William had his own ideas about when to sleep never, when to eat constantly, and when to decide the world was too overwhelming, randomly, usually at 3 a.m. But something magical happened in those first exhausting months. Emma and James became a team in a way they never had been before. When she was too exhausted to move after nursing, he took the baby to burp and change. When he panicked because William wouldn't stop crying and was certain something was terribly wrong, she calmed him with a confidence she didn't know she had. Helen, of course, was in her element. "Finally," she said, while rocking William in her experienced arms. "There's a baby in this house again." It felt too quiet, too adult. Babies remind us what matters. Emma took 3 months of maternity leave, though she remained involved in major strategic decisions via video calls when William slept, which wasn't as often as she'd like. James, true to his new life philosophy, reduced his board participation to monthly consultations. He discovered he didn't miss the constant hustle as much as he'd feared. He had found something more satisfying, watching his son discover the world. "Look," he'd tell Emma while holding William in front of the window. "Look at how the leaves fall. Someday we'll teach you to jump in them, and to build sandcastles at the beach, and to everything." The company thrived under Emma's leadership in ways that surprised even the optimists. Her approach of creating sustainable value instead of short-term profits proved not just ethical, but also incredibly profitable. The American Roots initiative expanded to Portugal, Italy, and France. The Southern hotels won international awards, and most importantly, employee satisfaction reached historical highs. "Remember when you thought you didn't belong here?" Mr. Richardson told Emma on her first full day back at the office after maternity leave. "Turns out the problem was never that you didn't belong. The problem was that here needed to change to deserve having you." 1 year after William's birth, on a sunny autumn day that seemed painted by an impressionist with golden leaves falling and air that was crisp but not cold, Emma and James did something that had been James's idea, but Emma had fully embraced. They renewed their vows. It wasn't in an opulent church or a luxury event hall. It was in a small chapel outside New Haven, the same where James's grandmother had married generations before. There were maybe 30 people present. Helen crying happily with William in her arms, who miraculously cooperated by remaining calm throughout the ceremony. Margaret, who now genuinely embraced Emma as a daughter. Sarah, Emma's mother, who had traveled from Brooklyn with tears of pride. Employees who had become family. Artisans from the project who had traveled hours from remote towns to be present. The ceremony was officiated by the local priest, an elderly man who had known the Montgomery family for decades. But the most powerful words didn't come from him, but from Emma and James themselves. 2 years ago, Emma began, her voice clear and strong, in a way it hadn't been at their first wedding. I asked you if you were going to be gentle with me. It was the question of a woman who had learned not to expect too much, who protected her heart, because the world had taught her it was safer that way. But you weren't just gentle. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, but the strongest form of love. You showed me I could be ambitious and vulnerable, strong and needing support, professional and completely human. Tears flowed freely down her face now, but her voice didn't waver. I fell in love with you not on our wedding night, though that was the beginning. I fell in love with you in thousands of small moments, when you knelt on the floor of your office, sharing your own failures so I wouldn't feel alone in mine. When you cried seeing our son for the first time, when you defended my right to fail and learn, when you chose every day to build a life with me, not a fantasy of what you thought it should be. James was crying openly now, unashamed. So today, Emma continued, taking his hands, I'm not renewing vows I made without fully understanding. I'm making new ones. I promise to choose you every day, on the good days when it's easy and on the hard days when it requires everything I have. I promise to be your partner, not your follower or your leader, but your equal in this crazy journey that is life. I promise to raise our son so he understands that real love is work, choice, daily grace. And I promise, James, to be as gentle with you as you've been with me, because that kindness has been the greatest gift I've received. When it was James's turn to speak, he had to take several deep breaths before the words could come out. Emma, that first night when I asked you what you wanted from life and you said you didn't know, because you never had the privilege of thinking about it. In that moment I realized I had found something more valuable than all the success I had pursued. I had found someone real. His voice broke, but he continued. I spent 40 years building things, companies, fortune, reputation, and I thought that was what would define me. But these 2 years with you showed me that building a life, a marriage, a family, that's the hardest work, and the only one that really matters in the end. You made me better not by changing me, but by showing me who I could be if I chose courage over control, vulnerability over perfection. James looked at William in Helen's arms, then back at Emma. I promise to keep choosing you even when it's difficult. I promise to celebrate your successes without feeling threatened by them, because your brilliance doesn't diminish mine, it amplifies it. I promise to be the father our son deserves, present and engaged, not just providing but actually participating. And I promise, Emma, to keep being gentle, not because it's easy, but because you taught me it's the only thing that truly transforms lives. They exchanged new rings, simple gold bands without the elaborate diamonds of their first wedding. These rings had been made by one of the project's metalwork artisans, a man in New Hampshire, who had engraved a phrase inside each: daily kindness. When the priest declared them married again, the kiss they shared was different from their first wedding. It wasn't tentative or filled with uncertainty. It was confident, celebratory, the kiss of two people who had walked through fire together and emerged not without scars, but stronger. The reception was simple. Traditional American food prepared by the house cooks, live music from a local band playing jazz and folk, and laughter. Lots of laughter, the kind that comes from genuine joy, not from alcohol or wanting to appear to be having fun. At one point, Emma found herself alone in the chapel garden, watching the celebration from a distance. James approached silently and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand resting where it had rested for months on her belly, though now flat again. "What are you thinking?" he asked against her ear. "About how 2 years ago I was terrified in a hotel suite asking a question because I didn't know what else to say. And look where we are now. Look at who we are now. Do you regret anything?" James knew the answer, but needed to hear it. "Regret?" Emma turned in his arms to look at him. I regret doubting for so long. I regret every moment I wasted in fear instead of faith. But regret this, us, the journey that brought us here, not for a second. From inside the chapel, William began to cry. That distinctive cry that meant he was hungry and wanted it now. Emma laughed. Duty calls. Let me, James said. You've given everything all day. I can give him a bottle. You sure? Completely. Besides, I need to tell him privately that he has the most incredible mother in the world, and he has very high expectations to live up to. Emma kissed him softly. Tell him he just needs to be himself. That will be more than enough. As James went to comfort their son, Emma stayed a moment longer in that garden, under a sky that was turning from blue to pink as the sun set over the Connecticut hills. She thought about everything she had gone through to get here, the fear, the failure, the redemption. She thought about the girl she had been, trembling in an expensive robe, asking a simple question, because she didn't know what else to do. Will you be gentle with me? He had promised to be more than gentle, and he had kept that promise not just once, but in 1,000 small ways over 2 years. But most importantly, Emma had learned to be gentle with herself, to forgive her mistakes, to celebrate her victories, to understand that being enough didn't mean being perfect. Life wasn't the fairy tale books promised, where problems were solved with a wedding and everyone lived happily ever after without effort. It was better than that. It was real. It was working every day to choose love over fear, connection over comfort, growth over stagnation. It was crying at 3 a.m. with a baby who wouldn't stop screaming and yet laughing 5 minutes later, when that same baby looked at you with curious eyes, full of total trust. It was building a company, not just for profits, but for purpose. It was transforming a marriage that started with half-truths into the most honest thing Emma had ever known. It was learning that strength came not from never needing help, but from having the courage to ask for it. As the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no artist could fully capture, Emma heard James's laughter from inside, mixed with William's now happy gurgling. And she knew, with the certainty that only comes from having walked through fire and emerged transformed, that everything, every tear, every doubt, every terrifying moment, had been worth it. Because that first night, when she asked if he would be gentle, she was asking the wrong question. The real question wasn't whether he would be gentle with her. It was whether she would have the courage to be gentle with herself, to believe she deserved the kind of love he offered, to understand that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, but the bravest way to live. And the answer, after all, had been yes. True love isn't what saves you, but what inspires you to save yourself while holding you through the process.